Well, let's get out to Hadley, who's in Riyadh and has been following the story. And today, Hadley, is the day where the Davos in the Desert Future Investment Conference was supposed to take place. As you know, a lot of companies, international companies, pulled out, but one of them, French company Total, will be there.
Jemana, I think that just speaks to what we all know to be the case. Even though it's not politics as usual, definitely it's business as usual when we talk about these major energy corporations, when we talk about these multinational companies that operate globally, operate certainly in this region, operate in countries like Libya and Iraq and certainly like Saudi Arabia. So business as usual for these corporates. And we understand, of course, that so many of these mid-level bankers essentially are coming from the folks in the United States as well. There's going to be a strong Russian presence, a strong Chinese presence, Asian presence generally, Japanese as well. But also, of course, this does speak to the broader facts of the case, which are that even though we haven't seen oil reacting very much in the recent days as a result of not just what's been happening with Mr. Khashoggi's case, of course, but also with the potential for sanctions taking place in just a few days from now on Iran, we're also seeing a growing understanding among these companies that they're not going to get the leadership in terms of, from the government as to what they should really be doing here in terms of towing a certain line. So they're really going to have to suss this out for themselves. And while the top CEOs of so many major companies and investment funds decided that it wasn't the right time to be in Saudi Arabia, so many of them telling CNBC that they had privately urged Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, to postpone this investment conference, they're sending people anyway. I mean, this is just the actual, the fact of this matter, isn't it? It's something that people understand, and it's something that we're certainly going to see here on the ground in Saudi Arabia. But I think what's more interesting is this major power play that President Erdogan is going to be making just a few hours from now, guys.
Hadley, I want to come back to the details around Khashoggi because Saudi Arabia has been pointing the finger in a couple of different directions, and Qahtani has been one name that's come up, the so-called bad cop, and the press has done a whole heap of different investigations into how instrumental he's been in Saudi Arabia around recent events, one around the kidnapping that happened of the Lebanese Prime Minister last year, but also the rounding up of billionaires, the arrests in Saudi Arabia that, of course, rocked the investment community recently. What do you make of the events now and whether the Crown Prince can move on and separate himself from this so-called bad cop?
I think, Karen, you have to take a step back and look at what's happening in this country today and look at what has been happening over the last couple of years. And really, the young people of this country that make up the majority of the population are behind Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. And the street is really behind him. And that's not just because they're pro-Saudi nationals. It's also because they see how much change he's been able to enact since gaining power just a couple of years ago, not just with Saudi Vision 2030, but also with all of these cultural changes as well, bringing movie theaters to this very closed society, allowing women so many more rights and the ability to drive. So he still does have so much support here in Saudi Arabia. At the same point, as I've said again and again, the older generation very, very worried about the direction of the country, worried about the fact that we have seemingly a new vision for what the Saudi government is going to look like in terms of a more aggressive foreign policy, and certainly with what we've seen in the last few days with the situation with Jamal Khashoggi as well. So I think you have twofold here. You have the people on the street who still very much support Mohammed bin Salman, but then you have the worried older generation and the business community as well, because we've still seen a lag in private sector investment in this country, within the country, as a result of what we saw at the Ritz-Carlton, what we saw with Saud Hariri. And certainly that's going to weigh on sentiment, I think, going forward. A lot of hesitancy about the future of the country just because it's unlike anything anyone has ever seen when it comes to the Saudi government. And when we talk about these regional plays as well, President Erdogan, as I say, is going to be making a major power play by being able to hold this over the heads, if you will, of the Saudi government, of the other governments in the region, and certainly over the United States, basically forcing Western powers to do something potentially. And that could upset the power balance in this region, something we haven't seen since the First World War. So I think that when we sit back and we say, okay, well, oil isn't moving here, and these corporates are going to continue to do business here, business as usual, even if it's not politics as usual, at the same time, we are witnessing some historic moves potentially in terms of regional stability. And it's something that I think most people would say they have to keep a very close eye on.
Hey everybody, it's Hadley Gamble from our new CNBC Middle East Bureau in Abu Dhabi. Thanks for stopping by. Now to watch more, you can try one of the videos that just popped up on your screen. And don't forget to subscribe.